Hello, and welcome to the Stitch the Season Slow Stitching Challenge for 2021. Today's video has the fourth prompt in the series, and we'll be doing 10 of these for the 10 days of Christmas for this year. Now, previous videos from the prep and planning stages to the first 3 prompts will be linked below, and you can join in on the challenge at any time that you'd like. Today's prompt is for prompt 4, and it's a really fun one. The prompt is text. And by text, I mean you should stitch any word or group of words if you're ambitious that strikes you as very Christmassy and something you want to incorporate into your ornament. For ideas, you can think of Christmas carols and songs and words that remind you of Christmas. Perhaps it was your child's first word, or just a word that reminds you of Christmas. It can be something as innocuous as peppermint or candy or Yuletide. It could be something traditional like Noel. Or it can be any word that you'd like. And I'll show you my process next. So now to work with text, it's just about embroidering your letters onto a piece of fabric. And here I've done them right on the fabric themselves, and then I could adhere it to my piece. I'm not going to use these 3 today. I'm going to start with something new, but you can see the difference between embroidering it on a plain piece of fabric versus a pattern piece. And it really is just about preference. I like the way it looks with the pattern piece, but I like the clarity of having just a kind of solid background. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my main piece, because that's what I'm going to work with here, and I'll set aside my backing for now. First thing I want to do is decide on a word. It can be anything related to Christmas, and a fun way to come up with a word if you don't have a favorite Christmas word is to just think of Christmas carols and just a word from those that you like. Or you can use anything for a Christmas word, Noel, or any of the different ways to say it in different languages. Whatever really speaks to you. You can even just say Santa. I'm going to put down calm as my word. And the first thing I'm going to do is create this background here, just like with this word cheer, with this off-white fabric. So I'll cut it roughly down to size until I see what size I want to use. I'll cut this a little more here. So more or less, that's how I want to have my fabric, this size. And I like to just pull the edges just a little bit to make it a little rough. Now I'm not going to attach it to my fabric directly. I want to put a little piece of this plaid fabric that I have, which I thought was really interesting, behind it. So I can just cut that out as well, making that a little larger than my wording piece of fabric. And if that's too large, I'll just trim everything down somewhat a little further. So I'll straighten out this piece. And see how that goes. And that's much better. I like the way that's looking. I'll also consider if I want to use a piece of trim or even a piece of lace behind it. And I think I like that idea of that lace behind it. I think it just adds a different texture. So I think I'll add that lace. I'll save the trim for another ornament. I want to just cut this down to size a little further, just so it's not quite as tall. I can have more of the plaid peeking through. And I can decide if I want to use some more batting. And I'm going to pass on the batting. I like the way it looks, just like this on my plaid background. So I'll take the plaid background, and now I'm just going to write the word that I want to use, calm, with my pen, and this way I can really work on my font. I have 4 letters, C-A-L-M, so I'll start by putting that M down. I think I'll make a large lowercase m, and then I'll put my C right in the front here as well. Put my L and my A. And then I can just play around with the height and the width that I want from these letters. This ink is completely removable with heat when I'm all done. So I have my word. Take my needle with my thread with a knot, and I want to start sewing. First thing I'm going to do is just pin this word fabric in place, and then I'll start with the L just because it's a straight letter. I'm going to use a stem stitch on these because I love the way that looks. It looks like twisted rope when it's all done. So I start by pulling my thread through my fabric, making a stitch, staying right on that marker that I made. And I don't want to pull it tight all the way. If I pull it tight all the way, I'll just loosen it up, pull my loop to the side, and come up in between that stitch. I've used this stitch before, but this is the procedure for it. So I'll go down the length of that L with the same technique, making that loop, holding the loops always to the same side, and coming up in that stitch. And I'll continue this all the way down. Holding that loop, splitting that stitch in half, and so on. Now I like this stitch in particular because there's no space between stitches. There's that overlap, and because it's coming from underneath the stitch, it twists and makes a little rope-like design, a little twirl. Remove that pin, pull that stitch, and then make that final stitch for that letter. Now that I have the easiest letter done, I'll go and do the remaining letters. And I'm going to go right to the right here on this M, and I'll show you what it's like after all my letters are stitched in place. So there, I stitched all my letters, and on the backing you can see how I move the thread around from letter to letter. And now I'm ready to decide what I want to do with my piece here. So I want to keep this lace piece and then maybe attach this. And I was considering adding this to the bottom. And I think I actually kind of like that. So I'll start by stitching around my letter panel here, and then I'll add my other elements. I'll keep my lace attached and I'll just trim that down afterwards. So I'll pin this in place. And I'm going to stitch around the outer edge of this plaid. So I have my thread all knotted, and I think I'm just going to make a straight stitch just around the edging of this plaid here. So I'll come up, and I'll try and keep all my stitches approximately the same size. And I'll go all the way around, leaving a little space in between each stitch, and securing that right to my piece here, my front piece of my ornament. And I'll show you after I've stitched all the way around how that looks. So I have my stitching all the way around the plaid, and then I used just a few stitches, 6 of them, to tack that wording down, just because I didn't want the ends curling up too much. I'm going to take my scissors here and just trim off this lace. It's not really going to show up top very much, just a little bit at the bottom. So I've cut that down to size. And now I just want to put my trim in place. I'm going to put it in place just like this, tack it down with a pin, and then with some dark thread, I'm just going to stitch it in place to hold it in position. So I have my trim placed down, and now with some black thread, just going to stitch it in place, tacking it down in a few positions. Tack it down on one side, just with little stitches. And then I'll work my way down the ornament, tacking it down as I go. So I have a few stitches in place. I'll remove the pin just to make sure it's exactly where I want it. Continue to tack it down. Then I'll show you it after it's all tacked down. So now I have the front of my ornament with my trim all stitched down, and I'll show you the back of it. You can see all the stitches that I made. I'm just going to very carefully trim the edging off, just like that. And I purposely did a few stitches vertically on the edge of that trimming, on that edge of that trim. So now it's time to take my backing and stitch my ornament. So I'll just take some thread in that neutral color, and I'll do a straight stitch all the way around the ornament to hold it in place, and I'll show you what that looks like once it's complete. So there I have my ornament all stitched around. Here's the front, here's the back with the number 4, and now it's ready to hang on my tree. So this is my 4th prompt in the Stitch the Season series. I hope you enjoyed watching me create it, and I tried to give you it in condensed steps so as to not take up too much of your time when I was doing repetitive stitches. I hope you'll take part in the challenge, and if you do, snap a photo of your work and post it on Instagram. Be sure to tag me and I'll take a look at your work. Check back tomorrow for prompt 5.